Angela Rayner.
Well, I think with the budget on the horizon, Andrew's probably hit the nail on the head. He probably will go on that letter that Angela Rayner has said to have signed asking questions about the budget, but also with the Employees' Rights Bill that was brought in on Monday, which was Angela's bill, he might ask something around that and how it might affect economic growth.
OK.
Lucy, what should Angela Rayner be prepared for from the Tory party?
Well, I think on that, we'd say that it's a normal part of pre-budget, you know, coming and going negotiations, etc. I think you'd expect ministers to defend their department and be interested.
Yeah, it's watching the House Commons now. That's Hilary Benn speaking, Northern Ireland Secretary. Lucy, I wonder whether Angela Rayner might be tempted to ask Oliver Dowden about the rumours, not yet denied, we think, by Oliver Dowden. He may be standing down to get a peerage.
Yeah, indeed. That would be interesting to know, wouldn't it?
And there we go.
It's Prime Minister's questions with the deputies.
Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in Samoa to discuss shared opportunities in the Commonwealth, including how we work together to deliver economic growth. With increasing threats facing Britain, it is vital that we also strengthen the defence, security and cooperation with our allies. And that's why today this government signed a landmark defence agreement with Germany, which will help keep us safe and create hundreds of jobs. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in sending our best wishes to Sir Chris Hoy and his wife Zara. He is a true sporting legend, and the courage and positivities they have shown will inspire many others. Mr. Speaker, I also send our condolences to those affected by the train crash in Powys. Mr. Speaker, this morning I have had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 14 years, my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme had suffered flatlining wages, in-work poverty and a battered economy that served nobody. Can I urge the Deputy Prime Minister to use the Employment Rights Bill to turn the page on the last 14 years, to give our businesses the support they need, and to finally restore dignity, prosperity and opportunity to the good people of Newcastle-under-Lyme?
I thank my honourable friend and welcome my honourable friend to his place. When this government took office, we promised the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation, a new deal for working people. We said that we would introduce a bill within the first 100 days, and we've kept that promise. This is a Labour government led by working people for working people.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Oliver Dowden.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Deputy Prime Minister in paying tribute to the bravery of Sir Chris Hoy? He truly is an inspiration to us all. And I also echo her comments about the train crash in Powys. Mr. Speaker, what is the Deputy Prime Minister's definition of working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, let me start by welcoming the honourable gentleman to his new place. Today is our first exchange, Mr. Speaker, since he pushed for a July general election. And if his own side hadn't offered him a peerage, I certainly would have. And Mr. Speaker, the definition of working people are the people that the Tory party have failed for the last 14 years.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister stood on a manifesto promising not to raise taxes on working people. It now appears she can't even define who working people are. So I'll give her another go. There are 5 million small business owners in this country. Are they working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the shadow Deputy Prime Minister can stand there with a straight face when it was the small businesses, the working people of this country that paid the price of them crashing the economy, sending interest rates scoring. I think he needs to learn his own lessons in opposition.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, I think the whole House will have heard the Deputy Prime Minister disregard 5 million hard-working small business owners. These are the publicans, the shopkeepers, the family running a local cafe. None of those count as working people to her. Now, Labour gave a clear commitment not to raise national insurance. The independent IFS have given their view on this. They say that raising employer national insurance is a tax on working people. Even the Chancellor said that raising employer national insurance was a jobs tax that will make each new recruit more expensive and increase the cost to business. So does she agree with the IFS and her own Chancellor?
Mr. Speaker, I remember the party opposite, what they said to business. What was it? F to business? Whereas this party held an international investment summit last week, which poured £63 million into our economy. We're pro-business, pro-worker, and getting on with fixing the mess that they left behind.
So I think we can take it from that answer that the Deputy Prime Minister doesn't agree with the IFS, and I suppose it shouldn't come as a surprise that she doesn't agree with her Chancellor. But does she agree with this? And I quote, "Working people will pay when employers pass on the hike in national insurance." Mr. Speaker, these are her words. So does she at least agree with herself?
Incredibly proud of is this week this government brought in a new employment bill which will raise the living standards of 10 million workers. Would the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister like to apologise for the hiking taxes, 70-year hiking taxes that he put on working people, the crashing of the economy and the disaster that he left behind?
Well, she mentions her policy. Let's be clear, it's a £5 billion hit to the British economy, and that's her own assessment. Mr. Speaker, I think that following these answers, there will be millions of working people now even more worried about the tax rises coming their way in next week's budget. But as this is our last exchange across the dispatch box, I'd like to turn to somebody I hope we can all agree is a hard-working person, His Majesty the King. Yeah. Will she join me in sending him best wishes ahead of the Commonwealth Summit in Samoa? In particular, will she confirm that this government recognises the unique role played by the Commonwealth? And will she commit to deepening this relationship so that under His Majesty's leadership, we build upon possibly the greatest legacy of the late Queen?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
I will miss our exchanges. Spirit, Mr. Speaker, I will agree with my right honourable friend. The King does a tremendous job, and so did the late Queen, and the Commonwealth is very important, and that's why the King and the Prime Minister at the moment are working together. Thank you.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for that answer. Our Commonwealth family is brought together by historical and cultural ties, indeed, much like the pair of us. But I will resist, Mr. Speaker, the temptation to replicate that. But as we look to the Commonwealth's future, we now have the opportunity to deepen our economic relationship. Will she therefore assure the House that the Prime Minister will use this summit to continue the work begun by the last government in building deeper economic ties with our Commonwealth friends and allies?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we talk about economics. The architect of the 2024 Tory general election campaign, doing his victory lap before retiring with the hereditary peers that he fought so hard to protect. He leaves behind the Tory party in utter denial, heads in the sand, refusing to accept the rejection by the British public. Their plan for Britain, Mr. Speaker, includes scrapping the minimum wage, cutting maternity pay and tax breaks for the big oil companies. Mr. Speaker, this Labour government is elected to end the Tory chaos.
Dr. Evans, you've got a sore neck. I wish it was your throat a little. Come on, Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, they don't like to hear it, but this Labour government was elected to end the Tory chaos, and that's exactly what we're doing. £600 more in the pockets of insecure workers, 30,000 new dads given paternity leave, and 10 million working people better off. While their so-called leadership candidates argue about what went wrong, this Labour government is getting on with rebuilding Britain.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many MPs, have heard many heart-rending stories of constituents who have had poor end-of-life support. Yet, had palliative care been available alongside an end-of-life plan, their experiences could have been so different. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree to set up a commission for palliative and end-of-life care so that everyone can access the very best support when terminally ill and have a peaceful and dignified death? And will she meet to discuss it?
I thank my right honourable friend for raising what is an emotive subject on both sides of this House. I know from my own work in this area before I was in this place what an incredible work this is and the honour it is to be there for somebody at the end of their life. Discussions have begun now on how to improve access to palliative and end-of-life care, and I'll ensure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss this issue.
Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself and the Liberal Democrats with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about Chris Hoy and all those involved in the train crash. Our NHS is bracing itself for a winter crisis. And one of the causes of the winter crisis every year is that there are thousands of people in hospitals who are fit to go home, but they can't be discharged because there are not the care workers in place to enable people to recover at home or in a care home. Would the Deputy Prime Minister consider the Liberal Democrats' idea of an NHS winter task force to winter-proof our NHS, end this cycle of the winter crisis and put to an end the scandal of hospital patients paying the price of the social care crisis left by the Conservatives?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments, and I share with her her desire to ensure that care workers are given the respect and the importance that they deserve. They are critical, in my opinion, to solving the problems within our National Health Service, and it's the Labour Party that will create a national care service, and we're launching our first ever fair pay agreement for care professionals to boost recruitment and retention. We must get the NHS back on its feet after the disaster of the Conservatives, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will have more to say in the budget.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. We stand ready as a party of constructive opposition to work with the government to fix our social care system. However, one of the measures that could make it harder for us to keep the carers that we so desperately need would be an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. Were that measure to go ahead, it would affect millions of small businesses, including 18,000 small care providers. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister to assure this House that there will be nothing in the budget that makes it harder for vulnerable people to access the care workers and the care that they desperately need?
Well, again, I won't speculate on the budget, not least with the Chancellor that sat at the side of me. But what I will say, and I'll reiterate what the Chancellor has said and what the Prime Minister has said, this will be a budget that recognises that working people of this country and the enterprise in this country has been hard hit by the 14 years of Conservatives. We will rebuild Britain and we will grow our economy to pay for our public services.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This next year marks the 200th anniversary of the Stockton to Darlington Railway, but the rail industry in my area is currently in peril, with hundreds of jobs at risk at Hitachi Rail as a consequence of a lack of action from the previous government. Will my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, join me and our honourable friend, the member for Newton Aycliffe and Spennymoor, with workers, management and trade unions to ensure that no stone is left unturned as we fight for the future of this Hitachi Rail factory?
I thank my right honourable friend for that question and welcome him to his place. He's been a champion for workers at Newton Aycliffe from day one, and I know he's met with the Transport Secretary, and I can assure him that we're in close contact with Hitachi on operations to secure a sustainable future for Newton Aycliffe, and we're committed to a long-term industrial strategy for rolling stock, seeking to support British manufacturing and end the volatility of recent years.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In today's spirit of cross-party working, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me in applauding the brave Labour staff members who've travelled across the Atlantic to campaign against Donald Trump?
Mr. Speaker, I'm loving this loving. I don't often get it. But I say to the honourable gentleman is that people in their own time often go and campaign, and that's what we've seen. It happens in all political parties. People go and campaign and they do what they want to do in their own time with their own money.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many in my constituency of Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, my family knows what it means to raise and support a disabled child. Charities like the Yard in Kirkcaldy do an amazing job providing vital additional help to disabled children and their families. Last month, a survey found that our country is so broken that 3/4 of parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities have been forced to give up work or cut their hours. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that our Labour government must tackle this intolerable reality?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend and pay tribute to those that work with children with special educational needs and disabilities. I myself have my amazing son who does tremendously well given his challenges that he faced in life. I know from personal experience the system is just not working for children and families. Future funding decisions will need to be taken as part of the upcoming spending review, Mr. Speaker, but we will work with the sector to deliver our shared mission and restore parents' trust.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 3 months into this Labour government, we have seen brutal cuts to support for pensioners. We've seen the taxing of education, and we have seen just this week £5 billion of additional pressure put on British businesses. Why does this government have such a problem with aspiration?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member might not have been in this place, and I welcome him to his place now during the last Parliament, but it was his government that left a £22 billion backlog. It was his government that left us with the biggest housing crisis. It was his government that crashed the economy, and it was his government that saw interest rates, inflation go to 11%, where pensioners were worse off than they are now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Deputy Prime Minister, I watched in horror and condemned the act of October the 7th by the terrorist group Hamas. A year later, I watched in horror as 42,000 people are killed in Gaza, 11,000 of them children. People burned alive, attached to drips, aid workers killed, and now families are starving. Our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said that the world will not stand by and see this the lack of humanitarian assistance. If the Israeli government will not listen to our Prime Minister's words, what tangible, measurable actions will we take as a UK-British government?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this really serious and important issue. The humanitarian situation in northern Gaza, Mr. Speaker, is dire, and we need an immediate ceasefire and much more aid allowed to flow in and an immediate release of all the hostages. We have suspended UK export licences to Israel for items which might be used in the current conflict, and this government has concluded that there is a clear risk that items exported to Israel might be used in serious violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. This does not change our position, Mr. Speaker, instead support for Israel's security, but we will always do so in a manner consistent with our obligations to domestic and international law.
David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our child protection services have had to deal with a number of cases where parents and carers have argued that their fatal actions were lawful punishment. So I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister, will she bring forward legislation bringing the rest of our country into line with Scotland and Wales so that all children enjoy unambiguous protection in law against violence?
I think it's a very important point that the right honourable gentleman raises, and I'll make sure that the Minister has a meeting with him. But the first job of any government is to protect the citizens, and that includes our children, and we'll make sure we work across the House to deliver that.
Caroline Harris.
Thank Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last Friday was International Menopause Day, and the government announced Mariella Frostrop as the new Menopause Employment Ambassador. Mariella will be working across Whitehall to ensure every department recognises the need to support women through their menopausal years. Hopefully, Mr Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will join me in celebrating this appointment and confirm that this government will do all they can to keep menopausal women happy, healthy and wonderful.
Absolutely, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for all of her work in this area. This government will boost protections for women experiencing menopause symptoms at work, and I'm proud that we've appointed Mariella Frostrop as the new Menopause Employment Ambassador. She is a powerful champion who will work with employers across the country to raise awareness, improve workplace support for women and help them stay in work and progress in their careers.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Charlie from my constituency of Esher and Walton is an 8-year-old boy with an autism diagnosis who has been out of school for almost a year. He is one of 1,800 children in Surrey missing school because of a lack of appropriate special educational needs provision. Will the government commit to ending this scandal by properly funding special educational needs provision in next week's budget so that children like Charlie in my constituency of Esher and Walton and beyond are no longer let down?
I thank the honourable member for her very important question, and I'm sorry to hear about what Charlie and many other children with special educational needs have gone through. We know we've inherited a really dire situation. Many members across this House have raised this issue, and that I'm sure the Chancellor have heard what she said and that she will be upcoming in the budget.
Mike Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This morning we woke to more tragic news of deaths in the Channel, something that we're hearing far too often. Just last month we saw the death of a pregnant woman and children, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister what this government is doing to take on the evil smuggling gangs who are trading in human misery.
I thank my honourable friend and welcome him to this place and his expertise within the National Crime Agency, and he knows that we inherited an asylum system in chaos, and as he quite rightly says, these are people, women, children. We are putting in place a credible plan to protect our borders and remove those with no right to be here by setting up our Border Security Command, backed by £75 million of investment, and we're working with our international partners to target and disrupt the criminal smuggling gangs.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Will the government please continue to work closely with West Lindsey District Council and myself to ensure that RAF Scampton is sold off in a timely fashion at a fair price so that we secure the future of the runway, the spaceport and the Heritage Centre rather than maximise value and cover it with housing?
I thank the honourable member, the Father of the House, for his question. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is taking urgent action to clear the backlog of cases, reducing the use of asylum accommodation and saving millions for the taxpayers. And I will ensure that the right honourable member is kept fully updated as the decommissioning disposal process of Scampton is followed.
Dave Hillier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in my constituency, hundreds of leaseholders, tenants and shared owners are living in properties with cladding and other defects in their properties, and thousands around the country. Their lives are on hold. Many are facing bankruptcy, delaying having children unable to move. We've had another change in ministerial responsibility. Will the Deputy Prime Minister take a personal lead on keeping on top of this? Because after the years since Grenfell, they're still living in limbo and need some hope of change.
I thank my honourable friend for this really important question. And I say from the outset, the pace of remediation has been too slow. And I do take a personal lead in this. 7 years on from the Grenfell Tower tragedy, it is unacceptable that so many buildings still have unsafe cladding. I'm meeting with developers, mayors, regulators and national building safety bodies to press the urgency of this work. And I will make sure action is being taken to make sure that homes are safe.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Shropshire's farmers have been suffering from flooding following 18 months of incredibly wet weather, topped off last Wednesday by in 24 hours by the month's worth of rain. They weren't eligible for the Farming Recovery Fund, and a Freedom of Information request by Farmers Weekly found that only £1.2 million of that £50 million has been handed out to farmers. Will the government consider extending the eligibility of that scheme so that we can keep farmers going when they're deluged by floodwater?
Well, I'm really sorry to hear the plight of the Shropshire farmers, and we inherited a flood defence programme in disrepair. Thanks to 14 years of mismanagement and failure, communities are unprotected and families and businesses are forced to pay the price. We launched a flood defence task force to turbocharge the delivery and coordination of flood defences, and we're investing in £1.5 billion this year to scale up flooding national resilience. Now make sure she gets a meeting with the Minister.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has delivered on its manifesto commitment to introduce the Employment Rights Bill in its first... This includes a historic fair pay agreement for care workers and will benefit all those who care for older and disabled adults like those in my constituency of Shipley. Will the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that care workers deserve pay and conditions that match the amazing work they do to support our loved ones to have a fulfilling life?
I thank my honourable friend and welcome her to her place. As a biased former care worker, I'll always champion carers and the complex quality and professional work that they do. I absolutely agree that care workers deserve the pay and conditions to match their enormous contribution to our community, and I'm proud to say that we're delivering that fair pay agreement that will give the carers the recognition that they deserve, and will make sure that those carers are able to deliver the best possible care to our loved ones.
James McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, a widely reported study from Aston University Business School showed that UK goods exports to the EU are 27% down and imports 32% lower than they would otherwise have been, thanks to the Conservatives' failed Brexit deal. Will the Deputy Prime Minister tell me what steps this government is taking as part of their reset with the EU to cut Brexit red tape for small businesses to help our economy get growing again?
Well done. Well, I welcome the right honourable member to his place, and he's right to advocate for small businesses. They are the backbone of our economy. This government is turning the page on the relationship with Europe, reinvigorating alliances and forging new partnerships rather than reopening the divisions of the past. We will improve the UK's trade and investment relationship with the EU, tearing down unnecessary barriers to trade. This will not involve rejoining the single market, customs union or reintroducing freedom of movement, but we will get that relationship better.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 27,000 people in the cities of London and Westminster live in the private rented sector. After 14 years of neglect and delay, they face damp and mould in their homes, they risk no-fault eviction and out-of-the-blue rent hikes. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that the Renters' Right Bill currently in committee will transform life for private renters and finally rebalance power between tenants and landlords?
I thank my honourable friend and I welcome her to this place. And I'm incredibly proud of the Renters' Rights Bill that we're pushing through Parliament, because too many renters are being exploited by a minority of unscrupulous landlords unable to challenge bad practices because they could be evicted at any moment. The party opposite shunters, they promised the electorate this, they failed to deliver. We will deliver.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Communities across the country, including in Bedfordshire, recently experienced widespread flooding. The village of Malden in my constituency has experienced an increase in flooding following cumulative housing development. As the Deputy Prime Minister requires communities across the country to build more homes, will she also ensure that those new developments do not increase flooding risk?
Again, I thank the honourable member for raising and also welcome him to his place. We recognise the devastating impact flooding can have. I know the flooding minister visited Bedfordshire in September to meet with volunteers and residents. We inherited flood defences that are in disrepair and behind schedule. We've launched a flood resilience task force, and when it comes to the planning reforms, Mr. Speaker, needed to deliver the 1.5 million homes this country needs, we will ensure that the right infrastructure is in place and communities are resilient.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Zoe's Place in the West Derby area of Liverpool is a hospice providing support to sick children and their families. It's been threatened with closure, has to find £5 million by the end of the year. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that hospices like these need to be on a statutory footing and not reliant on charitable funding?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and the hospice situation in this country has faced significant challenges because of the 14 years of devastation under the Conservatives. The Health Secretary has already raised these issues and knows that this is of importance, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting.
Final question, Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister will know that my constituency in Lincolnshire as a whole is the breadbasket of Britain, producing 12% of the food that's consumed across the entire nation, 30% of the vegetables, 20% of the sugar beet and so on. She will know that's because of the Grade 1 and 2 land in Lincolnshire. And yet Lincolnshire faces an invasion of giant pylons down the east coast and huge solar developments. So will she meet a delegation of colleagues from Lincolnshire and nearby, including my referendum from Louth and Sleaford and the Farnborough Hills, so that we can establish that energy security must never be the competitor with food security?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and he will know that we launched a consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. We will protect agricultural land. We will ensure that we have renewable energy, so we have energy security in this country, and we will get Britain building again.
That completes Prime Minister's questions, and let the front benches change over.
So that was the Deputy Prime Minister's questions, with Angela Rayner taking those questions. We are still joined in the studio by the Labour MP for Northampton North, Lucy Rigby, and the Shadow Veterans Minister, Andrew Bowie.
You can be sending your questions to gbnews.com/yoursay for our panel. Because remember, this programme is all about you. It's not about the MPs so much.
So, where shall we start? Well, we've got Richard, who has not told us where he's from, but it's a very good question. All the questions are great. I'm giving you about 8 out of 10 for telling us where you're from. Richard, you're on the naughty step. So he gets in touch to say these political parties working in each other's country is obviously a form of political interference. To say it doesn't affect relationships is also nonsense. It's another sign of political corruption. This is in relation to some people from the Labour Party, volunteers in the main, going over to help Kamala Harris. Why on earth should the party of government be sending people? Because the Prime Minister has to deal with whoever is president. So isn't it a bad look to send in some volunteers to help your sister party?
Laura, I would say to Richard, these people are doing this as volunteers, exactly as you said. It's as old as the hills. I've met Americans coming over here, campaigning for the Tory party, campaigning for the Labour Party. You know, Labour people go over there. This stuff is as old as the hills. The key thing is the special relationship. The Prime Minister has met Donald Trump, met in New York. Donald Trump, I think, said some pretty favourable stuff about the Prime Minister. But the key thing...
To our own Chris Hope.
To Chris.
Yes.
You know, the key thing is the special relationship. That's absolutely integral to our security and our prosperity. Yes. And look, for me, it's a deep thing. I spent some of my time growing up in the States. I had to pledge allegiance to the flag every morning. This stuff, it's personal to me. But more importantly, there's a special relationship. That's the key thing.
Have you been over there to campaign for Democratic in any kind of race?
Not to campaign, no.
But you've been, yeah. I don't know why do it if it causes diplomatic issues with the candidates? Andrew Bowie, have you been able to support Donald Trump and the Republicans yet?
No, I have not been over to support Donald Trump or the Republican campaign, either this year or in any previous year. And look, I mean, Lucy's absolutely right. I mean, these are volunteers in the main who are giving up their own time to go and campaign. And as everybody will acknowledge, when you're in politics, you enjoy campaigning. And this is one of the biggest elections in the world. And of course, if you get a chance to go and be a part of that, you jump at the opportunity. I think that the problem comes from that LinkedIn post that was posted by the head of operations of the Labour Party, which insinuated, and I'm not sure if this was right or wrong, that the Labour Party would in some way be supplying the accommodation for these volunteers going across. Now, Labour are now the party of government, so I think it probably is just a misstep of a party just finding its way back into power after 14 years. There are some things that you can do in opposition and language that you can use when you're in opposition. that you need to think much more carefully about now that you're in the party of government. So I do think that it was probably a mistake and a misstep more than anything more than that.
And there's a story breaking now. Labour denied that Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, and Matthew Doyle advised the Harris campaign when they went to a convention there in August. But they say that McSweeney's costs are paid by the Labour Party and Doyle's costs paid by a think tank in America. Is this a problem? I mean,
and you were at the convention, weren't you? You went over to...
I was at the DNC.
To the Democratic Convention.
Yeah.
Who paid your costs?
That's right. So an organisation that I spent some time with previously called the Progressive Policy Institute.
And is this a problem? I mean, I don't know, is it a problem for you? Is it look strange to have the Labour Party and think tanks paying the costs of MPs to go over there?
Look, it's difficult. There are various reasons that members of Parliament and indeed senior advisors get sent to things like the DNC or the RNC to engage with politicians in America. It's really important, Lucy said, to keep that special relationship going. And as much as that is a military and intelligence-led relationship, there are also individual relationships which get built either side of the Atlantic. And one way to connect with congressmen, senators, and indeed influential players in the American political scene is to attend those conventions and those conferences. The big question is whether any taxpayers' money was spent towards this, and as yet, it does not look like that was the case. So,
Andrew Bowie, we know who you want to be the leader of your party.
Yes.
You're a Kemi Badenoch supporter.
Yeah.
But I wonder who you want to be the next president of the United States.
Well, look, obviously I don't have a dog in that fight. As we've been saying, the UK and indeed the next Conservative government in 5 years' time will work with whoever is elected
It's a matter for the
on the other side
American
of the
people,
Atlantic.
isn't it?
But it is a matter for the American people.
You're so used to be at the UN, not here.
So another question is from Adrian, who doesn't say where he's from, but Adrian says, when are you, as a Parliament, going to tighten the rules on MPs receiving freebies for favours? He thinks MPs shouldn't get anything. What's your view on freebies? Do you accept them?
So the Prime Minister has been quite clear about the ethics, the steps he's taking with regard to an ethics commission. I think it's important that we do that to close the loophole. I think he's been clear about the different standards which Labour and opposition and the Tories in government were held to. I think it's right to close that loophole. But ultimately...
He's paid money back. He took thousands of pounds worth of freebies.
Ultimately on this, it goes to trust. It's about how people feel about politicians. And I think the Prime Minister is taking these steps because he recognises that trust is fundamentally important and that we need to repair it. Unfortunately, it's been broken, I would say, by 14 years of broken promises, people being promised things and then them not being delivered. So I think it's really key that we do restore trust in politics, and I think that's one of the ways we can do it.
And I think the new rules will apply to ministers. So there's no suggestion that, you get a freebie to, I don't know, the football and then you're in charge of a particular part of legislation. But of course, you're not a minister. You're a member of Parliament. And people will still want to get access to you, but... Should you, are the rules about right for you? Listen, I hold my hands up. I went to the Brits. I've been to the races when I was an MP. I actually feel a bit sorry for you, to be honest. The public are not with me on this, but I feel like, well, God, you're going to have to say no. I'm not going to do anything nice or fun.
Well, Gloria, no one's invited me to the Brits, and no one's invited me to the races. But I think we have rules around registrations and declarations there. And so, if I were to accept a ticket to something, I would have to make very clear in a public way that I did that and what the value of that was.
Yeah, I think I was at the Brits with you 1 year.
Obviously, we can't really remember.
Lucy's absolutely right. When you are offered and indeed accept an invitation like that, you have to declare it. And it's all there for the public to see. And then it's incumbent on that Member of Parliament to defend why they accepted that invitation and what the benefit was to that Member of Parliament and indeed to the people they represent from taking that invitation. So the rules are very clear. They're quite tight. And it should be right that as a minister, and I was a minister, when you are offered hospitality, you should declare it in the same way as a backbench Member of Parliament. So I think actually the route we're heading down on this is the correct one. And I think hopefully it will re-establish trust in politics. The reason this became an issue was the sheer scale of the level of hospitality and indeed gifts that were being accepted by the Prime Minister, more than double the next Member of Parliament in the House of Commons. So I think that was the problem. That's where this all started from. OK,
but back to the real world for our viewers, away from the world of freebies. James from Yorkshire says that since the government's got rid of the winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners, he says, why is the government writing letters and sending stamps and writing to pensioners who aren't getting the winter fuel allowance. But more wider point, adding on from James, is the budget is a big worry next week with so many millions of people, many watching GB News, and how would you reassure them? The question of who's going to be targeted, what is a working person, was asked there by Oliver Dowden to Angela Rayner.
Well, I think the Chancellor's, there's been a bit of a wait into the budget, and clearly...
Too long for you?
No, I don't think so. I think the most important thing on that is that the Chancellor is going through the steps that she needs to. We've seen what happened when those steps, going through the OBR, etc., weren't taken. That's why we got the disaster that was
the Office of Budget Responsibility, the independent assessment of the box.
And it's really important that we go through those steps, and the Chancellor's doing that. Liz Truss didn't, and we had that disastrous mini-budget that sent mortgages through the roof, took billions of pounds of our pension funds. So it's right that the Chancellor is going through these steps.
But you are one of the MPs who have written to the Chancellor saying you should borrow more to invest. I mean, that's uncosted. That might freak the markets off. Why is that any different?
I think so, Gloria. What that letter about is a Labour Growth Group letter. You're absolutely right. But that was about a very specific thing about changing how we look at the value that we invest. So if the government, for example, were to invest money in a particular asset, then it's about saying that not just valuing the spend there, but accepting the fact that that asset is going to generate revenue. Personally, I think that's a really sensible way of looking at investment that the government makes.
It's borrowing.
It is borrowing, and I think it's very worrying because up through the general election and indeed in the years preceding that general election, Rachel Reeves was very clear she wouldn't be changing the fiscal rules, and she would stick very firmly to those rules that were in place and had been in place for many years. I think a lot of people are worried about next week's budget. I think a lot of small business owners, given the Employees' Rights Bill that was announced on Monday, and the admission from government that this will add billions to the cost of doing business in the country.
You don't think workers in small business should be entitled to sick pay or the right to join a trade union?
Sick pay, but it's immediate sick pay. It's, and as the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden made out today, the owner of a small business is also a working person, providing employment, generating growth, and helping to grow.
Controversial to say if you start work, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, you're probably in your probation period as it happens, so probably, I'm not sure if you would be entitled to it. But, if you start work and you get sick, aren't you entitled to sick pay?
But who's paying for this? This is the thing. And how will it affect the jobs that are going to be built? And the fact is that if you lumber small business with too much regulation and red tape, they will stop growing, they will stop creating those employment opportunities, and ultimately the economy will suffer. And that's what we're worried about. And so a lot of people are worried about these things as we move towards the budget next week. And a lot of people are worried about what exactly is going to be cut in the budget next week, and where this extra money that Rachel Reeves says she needs to find is actually going to come
Lucy
from.
Rigby, the central point of Oliver Dowden's debate there was if you're going to lift the tax on employers' national insurance, that breaches your manifesto you fought.
It doesn't. We were really clear in the manifesto.
You weren't really clear.
We were. We said no taxes on working people. And your viewers know what working people are. They're people that go out and work for a living. Employers' NI is different, and the Tories know it's different, Andrew, because you produced a dossier saying that we hadn't ruled it out.
You said in the manifesto we will not increase
raise taxes on working people,
income tax or national insurance. You did not specify.
It says we will not raise taxes on working people.
So are small business owners not working people?
GB News viewers know exactly what working people are. They're people that go out and work for a living.
Working class people. Maybe that would be clearer.
More divisive.
I think we had a clear manifesto pledge on this, and we're going to stick to it. And as I said, the Tories know that employers' NI is separate because he produced a dossier saying
that's not what you said in your manifesto. You said NI. You didn't say employers' NI. You said NI.
Andrew,
and it is.
I don't have the manifesto in front of me, so I can't show you the sentence. But it says we will not raise taxes on working people.
But this will raise tax on working people. All those small business owners across the United Kingdom who are
VAT,
going to be paying more of the national insurance contributions will affect their ability to do business, affect their ability to grow, and affect their ability to employ working people up and down the United Kingdom. That is the problem.
It's pretty hard to take lectures from the Tory party on the economy, given the last 14 years.
Fastest growing economy in the G7 is the one that we handed back to you.
It really, really is. The economy's performed poorly, and that's been terrible for living standards for people in my constituency.
I completely understand that. But the fact is that as a result of the international situation, the war in Ukraine, the recovery from COVID, we had a situation where inflation was running out of control, and we had to take concrete steps to return the economy to growth, get inflation in a place that was manageable, and indeed be in a place where businesses were confident enough to invest. We managed to deliver that, and that's the economy that we handed on to the Labour Party when you won the election. I do think sometimes the Labour Party do overplay this piece about inheriting this broken economy when everybody from the IMF downwards says the economy was actually in a pretty good place given what we were dealing with over the 14 years that we had been in power.
But people know how they feel, right? And they know how much they've got coming in their pockets. They remember They remember Liz Truss's mini budget.
I'm going to go back to working people. What's wrong with rich working people? There are some people who, I mean, I don't need a, perhaps I should pay more tax. I don't know, perhaps Chris should pay more tax. Why wouldn't you tax rich working people as the Labour Party? If money's so tight, then, loads of people, not loads of people, but there are enough people who are doing actually very well.
I was watching what Chris's reaction was to the suggestion that he should pay more tax there.
But, perhaps some people can afford to pay more tax. Then, to get back to Rich James's question from Yorkshire, then you wouldn't have to take the money away from the pensioners. Perhaps, actually, the balance is wrong, the choice is wrong. Yes,
but the reason, unfortunately, Gloria, that we had to take the steps that we took on the winter fuel allowance were because of the in-year black hole, which the Chancellor found when she came into power. That's really, really clear. And the Office of Budgetary Responsibility has been clear about that.
There's a question here from Alan. He's been watching PMQs live on GBNews. He says he's getting a bit tired of your deputy leader or leader blaming the last 14 years of mismanagement of the previous government. How much longer can you keep blaming the Tory party
Chris, it is
for where we are now? It's Alan's question.
Well, and I'd say the same to Alan. This Labour government has been in for, just over 100 days. We're still measuring how long we've been in days rather than months. I mean, it is entirely relevant, that inheritance that we had, which was shocking, really shocking.
I mean, there was a black hole. You can argue about the extent, the size of it, but there was a black hole.
I think just about everybody acknowledges that the economy was, recovering, but that it was going to take a while to get back to a position where
because of that disastrous irresponsibility.
But the 20 billion black hole is very much disputed, and the decision to take away £300, the decision to take away the £300 winter fuel allowance from every pensioner in this country earning just over £13,000 was an absolute disgrace, frankly.
The black hole was there, Andrew. That's not disputed.
The black hole was not. It is disputed. I think Jeremy Hunt disputed by many independent economic commentators. Frankly, there are many different ways to. Now, the question about taxing people more. The continued freeze on income tax rates will actually lead to more people paying more in income tax as they move through the tax brackets. I think that is a regressive policy, and I think if there was anything that Rachel Reeves was going to do to encourage people to move up through the tax bracket and encourage businesses, it would be to unfreeze those income tax rates to allow people to move through and to keep more money in which they earn as they get.
And to move on into criminal justice, Daniel asked, never mind smashing the people smuggling gangs, which of course are succeeding with getting people across the south coast of this country, we can't even smash the organised gangs in our country. And I would add to that question, why is no one talking about the prisoner release in that PMQs, which is such a big issue for so many viewers and listeners? Is it because it's your fault and it's your fault, therefore it's not discussed? Lucy.
I think you'll hit the nail on the head, Chris, in the sense of that's why Oliver Dowden's not asking about it. Because the Tories promised all these prison places, didn't deliver them, and left the criminal justice system as a whole
for both parties,
in crisis. Only in the sense that we've inherited the problem, frankly, and we're dealing with it. We're dealing with it in a responsible way. We have
to. Do you get told as constituency MPs by, this person is being let out and this person did that and they're coming back into your community?
Haven't been told.
No,
I don't know. As a Scottish MP, it's a devolved competency of prisons in Scotland, so it doesn't affect the Scottish.
But it's on you, this release, isn't it?
Look, everybody acknowledges that the situation in our prisons was unsustainable. However, there were ways to deal with it, and I do think some of the people that we saw getting released earlier this week, some of whom had been in prison because of domestic abuse convictions or indeed other serious crimes, it was very worrying, especially to the victims of those crimes. So there are ways of dealing with this, and I don't think that the current Labour government actually have found a solution that works in terms of getting to grips with what everybody across the political divide acknowledges was an unsustainable situation within our prisons. We do need to build more prisons. We need to increase capacity in our prisons. But releasing some of the most vile people in our country back onto the streets, having only served 40% of their sentence, I think was a misstep.
Well, Andrew,
by the
you're
government.
absolutely right. The situation that we were put in, the prison system, is when we inherited it, is in crisis. So we're going to build these 14,000 more prison places, build the prisons and have those places, which I think the previous government promised and didn't deliver. And with this latest prisoner release, it will be the final one, and we have deliberately excluded people convicted of the most dangerous offences, including sexual offences, terror offences, of course, all excluded.
But Lucy, you have to admit, some people did fall through the cracks last time. And we need to ensure that doesn't happen again.
OK. We're going to go a bit lighter. So, Barbara, thank you for your question, Barbara. I wish we knew where you were from, but we'll get the hang of this. You'll get the hang of this. So, Barbara asks, why were Oliver Dowden and Angela Rayner flirting with each other? It got quite cosy and sort of funny and lighter towards the end of the exchange.
She said she'd missed her exchanges, and then everyone laughed about that word, didn't they? What does it mean, exchanges? I mean...
She said two gingers together.
Two gingers together.
But, you know, I'm going to say I like it. I like it when I can see politicians from opposite sides having showing that they can take each other on, have a forceful debate, just as you two are. But hopefully you would also have a drink together, perhaps. I'm not matchmaking, but but do you know what I mean? It must be possible to be civil and polite as well as robust.
It is, and you have conversations outside of the chamber with MPs from opposing parties, and you know, there's plenty that people have in common.
But she called Tories scum, Andrew Bowie. Didn't she, Angela Rayner?
Yeah, she did.
And how
She
can
did. And we all,
how can you be friends with someone calling you scum?
Well, I'm not a personal friend of Angela Rayner.
Well, how
to be
can
absolutely
Oliver
clear, but
Dowden be chummy with her?
I do have a lot of friends across the chamber in all the different parties actually represented in Parliament, and I think Lucy's absolutely right. You know, you need to be able to separate the politics from the floor of the House. To when you're not in that bear pit that is the House of Commons. And when Angela, I'm not going to defend Angela's comments, I thought it was completely out of order calling a colleague of mine Tory scum, as she did a couple of years ago. But sometimes when you're in the chamber, you get caught up in, as I said, the political bear pit that is that place, and you find yourselves prosecuting an argument that does not lend itself well when it's listened to outside that building. But in terms of friendships across the divide, they exist. It's important that they do exist because we need to work together on so many issues. And I think it's really important that we are able to disagree agreeably and have that civil discourse between two individuals of different political orientations.
Is that how you find it, Lucy?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as Barbara. I didn't think they were flirting. But I assume that
Very strange flirting if it was.
I do actually. But I assume it was a reference to... Was it a reference to Oliver Dowden potentially resigning, that being the final...
No, it wasn't. It was like two gingers together and exchanges. It all became quite chummy. I mean, on Oliver Dowden, though, Mark asked about Oliver Dowden, which I wasn't expecting. Were you, Gloria? He asked this: why didn't the Tory party appoint this man, Oliver Dowden, to lead your party? Andrew Bowie, we're in the white heat of a Tory leadership campaign. Why isn't Dowden standing?
Well, Oliver, like all of us who are elected as members of Parliament, had the opportunity to stand for leader. He obviously chose, for reasons he has to explain himself, not to stand for leader. But he's been an excellent Deputy Prime Minister, and before that, Secretary of State for DCMS.
Has he, though? Because Angela Rayner had to go in for calling an early election.
He wasn't alone in arguing to the Prime Minister to call that general election early. And he will have to explain why the decision was made in due course. I certainly wasn't in that room. But no, Oliver's been a great servant to this party within government, and indeed prior to him entering Parliament to Conservative governments before him when he served David Cameron in Downing Street. And his contribution from the front bench, if he is no longer to be on the front bench following next week, will be much missed.
And he stays on?
I mean, that's a question for Oliver.
OK.
And if Kemi Badenoch, your candidate, wins... She will obviously be at Prime Minister's Question Time every week, talking to, putting questions to Keir Starmer. You know her in a way we don't. What do you think? What sort of style will she bring? What will be new about the way that she does things if she is to become the leader of the opposition?
Well, I think that her approach will be somewhat different to Rishi Sunak's and indeed Boris and Theresa's before her. She is very combative. She doesn't shy away from a fight. And I think it will be very entertaining to see Kemi versus Keir from 2 weeks' time today.
You two have been fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
I hope you come back again. You've been back a number of times. We want you back as well, Lucy Rigby from Northampton North. Thank you. Well, coming up is Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily. And we want to know what's coming up in your show.
Well, yes, indeed. Prolific Labour Party donor Lord Ali has been this afternoon forced to apologise after breaching the House of Lords Code of Conduct on 4 occasions. He's failed to properly declare his interests.
And following the clearing of Sergeant Martin Blake, the BBC is reporting that black communities in South London have been left traumatised by the verdict. Is that true, though?
Well, a great show. Thank you both. And thanks for our panel today. Lucy Rigby, Andrew Bowen, of course, my friend Gloria Piero. Enjoy that show.
It's the budget next week. Be with us.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers. Sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. A fairly foggy start across the south, though that's clearing through this morning, leaving a largely dry day with plenty of sunny spells. Cloudier in the northwest, though, with some rain, though that is generally easing. That's as a result of a weather front that's just moving into the far north of Scotland. But otherwise, we've got high pressure building across the country, leaving plenty of dry and bright weather conditions across the UK. Perhaps that sunshine fairly weak at times with a build-up of cloud, but otherwise largely dry, just the chance of the odd shower across Wales and the Midlands later, though you'll be rather unlucky if you catch any of those. Different story across Scotland, though. Plenty of cloud here, some rain at drizzle at times, and plenty of blustery winds feeding into the far northwest. Now, as we head into the evening, those winds are going to continue to strengthen across Scotland, particularly those exposed coasts in the far northwest, with a risk of gales overnight. Still plenty of cloud across the country too, though any rain and drizzle generally easing. Quite a cloudy picture across Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, but otherwise across the south, plenty of clear skies to end the day. Now, where we see those clear skies overnight is going to turn rather chilly, though not turning quite as chilly as it did last night. Perhaps still some pockets of mist and fog, but once again, not quite as foggy as it was this morning. Across Scotland, though, those winds will continue to strengthen, a risk of gales overnight, and a chance we may just start to see some rain clip the Outer Hebrides. But otherwise, a largely dry night, and most towns and cities remaining in the high single figures, low double digits. Now, through the course of tomorrow, once again, plenty of blustery winds across Scotland with a risk of coastal gales, and we'll continue to see that cloud spill in from the northwest with some outbreaks of rain, particularly